The afternoon had been gentle with Titi, the kind of calm that felt earned rather than borrowed. The boutique smelled faintly of fabric and polish, soft music humming in the background as she examined a dress she didn't urgently need but wanted anyway. It was one of those rare moments when life seemed cooperative, her marriage stable on the surface, her home quiet, her heart untroubled. When she finally stepped outside, sunlight brushed her face and warmed her skin, and she paused for a moment, adjusting her bag and breathing in the ease of the day. That was when she noticed the familiar black SUV parked across the road, its engine idling, its presence unmistakable. Relief washed over her instinctively. Chitty was nearby. Maybe he had come to surprise her. Maybe their paths had crossed without planning. For a brief second, the universe felt aligned. She took a few slow steps forward, her eyes already searching for him with the casual confidence of a wife who had no reason to doubt. Then she saw him clearly. Chitty stood beside the open back door of the SUV, his posture relaxed in a way she had seen many times before, shoulders loose, head tilted slightly as he listened. But he wasn't alone. A woman stood close to him, close enough that space had already been negotiated and crossed. Not clinging, not dramatic, just comfortably present. The woman's hand brushed his sleeve lightly as she spoke, her expression calm, unhurried, familiar. There was no urgency in her movements, no awkward distance. It was the ease that struck Titi first, not jealousy. Ease always came from repetition. Titi slowed without realizing it. Her feet carried her forward, but her mind lagged behind, trying to rearrange what her eyes were telling her into something acceptable. She studied the woman carefully, as though details might explain things away. Simple clothes, neat hair, a face that wasn't trying to impress. The woman looked settled, like someone who belonged exactly where she stood. Titi's chest tightened, not sharply, but with a dull pressure that made her breathing conscious. She told herself not to assume, not to jump ahead of truth. After all, seeing a man with a woman did not automatically mean betrayal. But something inside her, the part that had lived with Chitty for years, shifted uneasily, sensing that this was not a coincidence waiting to be explained. As Titi stood there, the world around her continued its normal rhythm, indifferent to the quiet fracture forming in her chest. Cars passed. Voices floated in and out of hearing. Yet her attention narrowed until only two figures remained in focus, her husband and the woman beside him. She noticed the way Chitty leaned in slightly when the woman spoke, how his laughter came too easily, too freely, as though he had already relaxed into her presence. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense. There were no exaggerated gestures, no bold touches. What unsettled Titi was subtler than that. It was the absence of restraint, the lack of awareness that someone else might be watching. This was not a man being careful. This was a man at ease. The woman turned her head slightly, saying something Titi couldn't hear, and Chitty smiled in response, not the polite smile he used with strangers, but the unguarded one that softened his face. Titi felt her stomach drop. She knew that smile. It belonged to moments of familiarity, moments earned over time. The woman's body language confirmed it. She wasn't positioned as someone waiting to be dismissed. She stood with confidence, angled toward him, her presence unquestioned. There was no urgency in her movements, no sign that she was just passing through. Titi's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as her thoughts began to crowd in, each one heavier than the last. Who was she? Why did she look so comfortable? Why did Chitty look like he didn't need to explain himself? Titi took another step forward, this time deliberately. She wasn't angry yet. She wasn't ready to accuse or confront. She wanted clarity. She wanted to hear his voice, to watch his face when he saw her, to see whether surprise or guilt would greet her. In her mind, she rehearsed nothing dramatic, just his name, spoken normally, enough to announce her presence. She expected confusion, maybe mild embarrassment, maybe a quick introduction that would settle her nerves. What she did not expect was what happened next. As Chitty's gaze lifted and finally met hers, something changed so abruptly that it felt like watching a mask fall. The color drained from his face. his smile collapsing as though it had never belonged there at all. The instant Chitty recognized Titi, panic took him completely, unfiltered and visible. His body reacted before his mind could assemble a plan. His shoulders stiffened, his laughter cut short mid-breath, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes darted around as though searching for escape. The woman beside him sensed the shift immediately. She stopped speaking, her calm gaze following his line of sight until it landed on Titi. For that brief moment, all three of them were connected by the same realization, but only one chose to run from it. Instead of stepping forward, instead of lifting a hand or calling out to his wife, Chitty moved backward abruptly, reaching out and gripping Musa, his driver, by the arm. Before Musa could react, Chitty pulled him forward, positioning the man squarely between himself and Titi. It was not subtle. It was not accidental. Chitty bent slightly, pressing close behind Musa's broad back, his body angling away as though trying to fold himself out of sight. From where Titi stood, the image was unmistakable and humiliating. Her husband, her confident, outspoken husband, was physically hiding behind another man. She saw him lean to the side briefly, his head peeking out just enough to confirm that she was still there, before retreating again, deeper into concealment. Musa froze, caught off guard, unsure whether to step aside or remain still, his discomfort written plainly across his posture. Titi's breath caught painfully in her throat. The world seemed to slow as disbelief washed over her, heavier than anger, heavier even than betrayal. She had prepared herself for many reactions, shock, guilt, denial, but not this. Not cowardice, so naked it bordered on desperation. She called his name once, softly, not shouting, not accusing. Chitty. The sound of it lingered in the air, unanswered. He did not step out. He did not respond. He stayed hidden, gripping Musa, as though being seen would destroy him. In that moment, something inside Titi shifted permanently. Whatever explanation might come later, whatever lie or justification might be offered, could never erase the image of the man who chose to disappear rather than face his wife. For a few seconds, everything held its breath. Titi stood at the edge of the curb, staring at the wall her husband had built out of another man's body, trying to understand whether she was witnessing fear or disrespect, or both. Chitty still didn't speak. He didn't even try to shape his mouth around her name. Instead, he leaned in close to Musa's ear, his lips moving fast, the way people speak when they're giving urgent instructions they don't want anyone else to hear. Musa's face tightened. He glanced at Titi once, just once, then looked away immediately, as if eye contact would make him an accomplice. The strange woman, on the other hand, didn't look confused. She didn't look like someone caught off guard. She turned slightly, calm as a person who had rehearsed silence, and moved toward the back door without waiting to be told. She opened the door smoothly and slid in with practiced ease, settling into the seat as if she belonged there, as if the car was her place of safety, not a hiding spot. Chitty followed quickly, ducking low, still avoiding Titi's eyes, moving with the clumsy haste of a man desperate to end a moment before it grows teeth. His hand shot out for the door handle, and the door slammed shut with a final sound that felt like punctuation. Titi took a step forward instinctively, not running, just moving, as if proximity would force truth into the open. But Musa was already at the driver's door. He climbed in fast, hands gripping the wheel like he was holding something alive and dangerous. The engine revved loudly, sharp and sudden, and the SUV jerked forward without the gentle patience of normal driving. The vehicle cut into traffic with a reckless urgency that made another car brake hard. Tires screeched against the road, the sound ripping through the calm afternoon like a warning. The SUV surged ahead, weaving into a gap that barely existed, and in seconds it was gone so quickly it felt unreal, as if the whole scene had been a cruel illusion staged only for Titi's eyes. Dust and heat shimmered in the space it left behind. Titi stood still, her arm half raised, not because she expected them to stop, but because her body hadn't accepted yet that her husband had just fled from her like a thief escaping daylight. The street continued as though nothing had happened. Yet for Titi, the world had changed shape in that instant. Something private had been dragged into the open, then snatched away before she could touch it. TT remained there longer than made sense, as if standing still could rewind time, as if the road might undo itself and deliver the SUV back to the curb with an apology attached. Her mind replayed every detail with cruel clarity. The way Chitty's smile died, the way his body shrank behind Musa, the way the woman moved like she knew what to do, the way the car launched forward with urgency that screamed guilt. She tried to hold on to logic, to force her thoughts into neat lines, but nothing sat properly. If the woman was harmless, why hide? If there was nothing to explain, why flee? And why did Musa's eyes look like a man who had just been dragged into someone else's sin? TT's throat burned with words she didn't speak. Questions gathered like stones in her mouth, heavy and unsaid. Eventually, she walked away, not in a dramatic rush, not with tears, not with frantic gestures. She simply turned and moved, one foot in front of the other, the way people do when something inside them has gone quiet. The boutique's glass reflected her as she passed, and she barely recognized her own face. Composed, almost blank, like a woman walking out of a room after hearing a truth she didn't want. The road home felt longer than it had any right to be. Each passing car made her flinch slightly, her body expecting that familiar SUV to reappear like a bad joke. But it didn't. It remained absent, and the absence grew its own voice, loud, accusing, unrelenting. By the time she reached her gate, her chest felt tight, not from crying, but from holding everything in. At home, the walls looked the same. The furniture stayed where it always was. The air still smelled like the house she had built with love and routine. Yet the home felt different now, like a stage after the lights have gone out. TT moved through rooms without purpose, touching nothing, changing nothing, refusing to perform normal life when her spirit had not agreed to it. She washed her hands slowly, not because they were dirty, but because she needed something to do with them. She sat down. She stood up again. She stared at the clock without counting time. What she felt was not just pain, it was insult. Betrayal could be argued about later. But cowardice? Cowardice was an answer all by itself. And the fact that he left her there, alone, shocked, and unworthy of explanation, was a wound with its own sharp edge. As evening arrived, TT did what she always did, not because she cared about routine, but because routine was the only thing that still obeyed her. She moved through the kitchen quietly, preparing food without appetite, setting things down and picking them up again, as if she was trying to keep the house from sensing her fear. The sky darkened gradually, and the shadows inside the rooms grew longer, stretching across the floor like silent witnesses. Every now and then, she paused to listen, not for a sound she actually expected, but for the comfort of possibility. The gate remained quiet. The driveway stayed empty. Chitty did not return. Not at the hour he usually came. Not later. Not even with the casual arrogance of a man who believes time excuses everything. The longer he stayed away, the more the memory of him hiding behind Musa hardened inside her, turning from shock into something colder. Nights settled fully, thick and quiet. TT didn't change into sleepwear. She remained dressed as she had been, not out of stubbornness, but because sleep felt like surrender, and she didn't know what she would wake up to. She sat in the sitting room with the lights on, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly, her face calm in a way that was almost frightening. She thought about every year of her marriage, small sacrifices, small forgivenesses, the unspoken labor of being a wife who keeps a home steady while a man moves freely. She wondered when this began. She wondered how many times she had smiled at him while he was already living a second life. Most of all, she wondered what kind of man looks at his wife and chooses to hide as though she is the threat. She didn't cry. Tears required softness, and softness was not what she had tonight. By the time midnight approached, the house felt like a courtroom, and TT felt like the only judge left awake. She heard the distant sounds of the city settling, fewer cars, softer movement, the occasional bark of a dog far away, yet inside, everything stayed tense, like a string pulled too tight. Her mind wandered to Musa, to the way his eyes had avoided hers, to the way the car had left too fast. She began to understand something painful. Whatever was happening was not a single man's secret anymore. There were hands in it. there were collaborators, however unwilling. And the thought made her stomach twist, because betrayal was one thing, but betrayal supported by loyalty from those around you. Betrayal reinforced by people who see you every day and still choose to lie, was another kind of cruelty. Titi sat there, dressed and awake, while the night deepened, and the absence of her husband became louder than any argument they had ever had. The sound of the gate opening came so late that it almost felt deliberate, as though Chitty had waited until the night was deep enough to soften his entrance. The car rolled in quietly this time, without urgency, without drama, like a man returning from an ordinary day. Titi did not move when she heard it. She remained seated in the sitting room, her posture unchanged, her face composed in a way that suggested she had already prepared herself for whatever version of truth he planned to bring home. When Chitty finally walked in, his steps were cautious, measured, as if he were entering a room where something fragile lay on the floor. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face, not because she was awake, but because she looked untouched by sleep, by tears, by weakness. For a moment, he seemed unsure of how to begin, as though the night had rehearsed him poorly. "Titi," he said softly, testing the name as if it might bite him back. She looked at him then, slowly, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a calm that made his chest tighten. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice settling into a tone that sounded practiced, almost casual. He told her there was nothing to worry about. He said the woman she saw was Moose's cousin, someone who had needed a lift, someone who had no business being misunderstood. As he spoke, he avoided the details that might trap him, choosing broad explanations that sounded reasonable enough if one did not look too closely. He explained his sudden departure as urgency, as inconvenience, as something blown out of proportion by timing and coincidence. He even smiled faintly at one point, as though the lie would sit better if it looked relaxed. Titi listened without interrupting him. She did not challenge the story. She did not raise her voice or ask why a cousin required such secrecy or speed. She watched his face instead, the slight tension around his mouth, the way his eyes searched hers for acceptance, the way his shoulders loosened when she did not argue. When he finished, silence filled the space between them, heavy and unbroken. Finally, she nodded once, a small gesture that seemed to release him. He exhaled, relief passing through him so clearly it almost embarrassed her. In that moment, Chitty believed the worst was over. He believed the lie had landed safely. What he did not realize was that Titi's silence was not agreement, it was distance forming quietly, the kind that grows when words stop being trusted. Morning arrived without softness. Titi rose early, moving through the house with quiet purpose, her mind steady in a way that surprised even her. She did not replay the night again. She did not rehearse arguments she would never have. Instead, she focused on what could be confirmed, on what existed beyond Chitty's carefully arranged words. When Musa arrived later that morning, she greeted him as she always had, politely, calmly, without a trace of accusation in her tone. Her voice did not tremble when she asked him about the woman from the previous day. She framed the question lightly, as though she were merely curious, as though nothing important rested on his answer. Musa stiffened almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening that only someone paying close attention would notice. "Yes, madam," he said after a brief pause. "She is my cousin." His voice was steady, too steady. He kept his eyes lowered respectfully, his hands clasped in front of him in a posture of obedience. He added nothing more, offered no unnecessary explanation, no extra detail that might unravel the story. Titi thanked him calmly and dismissed him, her expression unchanged. As Musa turned away, a quiet tension lingered behind him, invisible but heavy. He did not look back. He did not ask if she needed anything else. He walked away like a man who had delivered exactly what was expected of him. And in doing so, he sealed something without knowing it. Titi remained where she was long after Musa left, absorbing the confirmation not as reassurance, but as information. The consistency between Chitty's story and Musa's words told her one thing clearly. This explanation had not been born in the moment. It had been arranged. She did not yet know how or when, but instinct whispered that two men rarely speak with the same certainty unless they have agreed on what truth should sound like. Still, she said nothing. She chose not to push, not to test the edges of the lie yet. Acceptance, she understood, was sometimes the best way to see how far a lie was willing to travel on its own. What Titi did not know, what she could not have known, was that the lie had been constructed long before Chitty ever walked back into the house that night. Inside the speeding SUV, as the city blurred past and the tension pulsed thickly in the air, Chitty had leaned forward from the back seat, his voice low and urgent. He told Musa exactly what to say if Titi asked questions. He chose the word cousin because it was safe, distant enough to discourage curiosity, familiar enough to sound believable. Musa listened in silence, his hands gripping the wheel as he nodded, understanding that refusal was not an option. The woman in the back seat, Nena, had said nothing. She simply watched the road ahead through the windshield, calm and unreadable, as though lies were a language she understood fluently. Chitty spoke quickly, arranging the details as though building a wall under pressure. He warned Musa not to hesitate, not to add unnecessary explanations, not to let guilt show on his face. He told him confidence mattered more than truth. Musa agreed, though his chest felt tight with unease. By the time the car slowed and the city lights grew softer, the story was complete, rehearsed enough to sound natural. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the hum of the engine and the unspoken understanding that something irreversible had been set in motion. None of them spoke again until Chitty stepped out of the car to face his home, carrying the lie like armor he believed would protect him. Back in the house the next morning, Titi moved quietly, unaware of how deliberately her reality had been shaped. She did not yet know that her husband's escape, her driver's obedience, and the woman's silence were all parts of the same arrangement. What she felt instead was a growing stillness inside her, a sense that truth was no longer something handed to her willingly. And though she did not yet know where the road would lead, one thing had already settled firmly in her heart. Whatever was happening around her had been planned, and plans, once uncovered, rarely forgave the people who made them. Chitty met Nena on a day that felt ordinary enough to erase suspicion. It was a small, carefully arranged gathering held in a quiet, tasteful space. Nothing public, nothing flashy. Just a few people exchanging polite conversation and shared memories of work and old connections. The invitation had come from a man Chitty trusted, someone he had known for years, someone whose smile still carried the warmth of familiarity. There were no speeches, no announcements, no reason to be alert. Chitty arrived relaxed, confident in the version of his life that had always worked for him. That was when Nena was introduced, briefly, almost casually, like an afterthought that didn't require attention. She didn't make a show of herself. She didn't lean in or laugh too loudly. She simply acknowledged him with a nod and a calm smile, then returned to listening, as though she had no interest in being noticed. What drew Chitty in was not attraction at first, but recognition, or what felt like it. Over the course of the evening, Nena spoke only when necessary, her words measured, thoughtful, and strangely aligned with his own unspoken frustrations. She listened more than she talked, and when she did speak, it was never to impress, only to reflect. She remembered small details, projects he mentioned briefly, concerns he brushed aside, things even close friends often ignored. Chitty found himself talking more than usual, filling the silence she allowed, enjoying the feeling of being heard without being questioned. It felt effortless, safe. There was nothing about her presence that screamed danger. If anything, she seemed like someone placed in his path by coincidence, someone who understood him without demanding explanation. After that night, their paths crossed again, always naturally, always without force. A brief meeting here, a quiet conversation there. Each encounter felt unplanned, yet perfectly timed. Nena never pushed for intimacy. She never asked him to choose. She simply stayed close enough to become familiar. By the time Chitty realized he was thinking about her in moments of rest, he believed it was his own doing, his own desire finding expression where it had been ignored. He never questioned why someone so calm appeared in his life so easily. He never asked who had placed her there. And because of that, the trap closed without sound. What Chitty did not know, what he could not have imagined, was that Nena's presence in his life had been carefully planned long before their first meeting. The man who hosted that quiet gathering, the one Chitty trusted without hesitation, carried a resentment that had never healed. Years earlier, Chitty had walked away from a decision that benefited himself and quietly ruined another man's chances, dismissing the fallout as business. He never looked back. But the man he left behind did. He watched. He waited. And when time had softened Chitty's caution, he decided revenge did not need confrontation, it needed patience. He chose destruction that would feel like self-inflicted ruin. Nena was chosen for her discipline, not her beauty, for her restraint, not her desperation. She was briefed carefully on Chitty's habits, his weaknesses, his need to feel admired without accountability. She was told what he liked, what he feared, where he grew careless. Most importantly, she was instructed never to rush him. The plan was simple. Let Chitty believe he was in control. Let him make the first move. Let him believe he had found something outside his marriage that comforted him rather than challenged him. Nena understood her role fully. She did not see herself as a seductress. She saw herself as an instrument, quiet, precise, effective. As Chitty grew closer to her, the enemy watched from a distance, satisfied with the slow progress. There was no need to interfere anymore. The seed had been planted. Chitty's choices would do the rest. Every conversation that made him feel understood, every decision he made while leaning on Nena's calm presence, pulled him deeper into a web he could not see. By the time the enemy stepped back, the damage was already underway, unfolding at a pace that could not be reversed by apologies or explanations. And still, Chitty remained unaware, mistaking comfort for coincidence and trust for safety. Nena's power over Chitty never came from force. It came from quiet alignment. She listened when he complained about pressure. She agreed when he spoke of being misunderstood. She never contradicted him openly, never challenged his pride. Instead, she asked questions that guided his thoughts gently, leading him toward decisions he believed were his own. When he doubted himself, she affirmed him. When he hesitated, she reassured him. Slowly, subtly, she positioned herself as the place where his worries could rest without consequence. Chitty began to trust her judgment more than his own instincts, not realizing his instincts were being carefully shaped. As his dependence grew, so did his carelessness. He started making choices that favored immediacy over stability, confidence over caution. Nena never encouraged recklessness openly. She simply framed risks as opportunities, loss as temporary, and caution as fear. Each step he took felt justified in the moment, especially because nothing collapsed immediately. Things only began to shift quietly. Small delays, mild resistance, subtle losses that didn't yet feel connected. Chitty dismissed them as coincidence, unaware that each misstep was another thread tightening around him. Nena remained calm through it all, offering comfort without solutions, sympathy without warning. By the time Chitty realized something was wrong, he was already too far in to retreat without damage. The woman he believed had brought him peace was, in truth, guiding him steadily toward collapse. Yet she never raised her voice, never demanded loyalty, never revealed intention. The trap worked because it felt like refuge. And as Chitty leaned deeper into it, convinced he had found understanding outside his marriage, he unknowingly walked himself toward the moment when realization would come, not as revelation, but as regret. Titi's silence did not arrive suddenly. It settled in gradually, like dust after a long disturbance. From the outside, nothing appeared broken. Meals were prepared when necessary. Greetings were exchanged. The house remained orderly. Yet something essential had withdrawn from her movements, the emotional labor that once filled every space. She no longer asked where Chitty was going or when he would return. She did not question his moods or attempt to bridge the growing distance between them. Instead, she observed him with a quiet attentiveness that was not born of suspicion alone, but of acceptance. She had stopped trying to correct what she could no longer trust. In her calmness, there was no forgiveness yet, only a measured retreat. Chitty noticed the change, but misunderstood it completely. He interpreted her quiet as exhaustion, as maturity, as a sign that the storm had passed without damage. Her lack of confrontation reassured him more than words ever could. He moved more freely, stayed out longer, spoke less carefully. The absence of resistance made him careless. He did not see that TT's silence was not submission. It was distance hardening into resolve. She was learning to exist without explanation, without expectation, and in doing so, she was slowly removing herself from the emotional reach he once relied on. Inside, TT was not numb. She was alert. Every gesture, every inconsistency, every subtle shift registered quietly. She paid attention to what Chitty said and, more importantly, to what he avoided. She noticed how he spoke of certain plans vaguely now, how his confidence came and went in uneven waves. She did not confront him because confrontation assumed repair. And, at this stage, she was no longer certain repair was something she wanted. Silence, she discovered, was not weakness. It was space to see clearly, without interference. The first losses came so quietly that Chitty dismissed them as inconveniences. A deal that had once felt certain stalled without explanation. A promised opportunity dissolved into polite distance. People who once returned his calls promptly now delayed, offering vague reasons that sounded rehearsed. None of it felt catastrophic yet, which made it easy to ignore. He told himself that fluctuations were normal, that success was never linear. Still, unease crept in slowly, whispering that something fundamental had shifted beneath his feet. He began working longer hours, speaking more forcefully, trying to assert control over situations that no longer bent easily. Nena remained calm through it all. She listened patiently as he vented, nodding thoughtfully, offering reassurance rather than solutions. She framed the setbacks as temporary, encouraging him to stay bold, to press forward instead of pulling back. Her words soothed him, restoring his confidence just enough to keep him moving in the same direction. He did not notice that her advice always leaned toward risk, toward decisions that required trust rather than caution. He mistook her composure for loyalty, her agreement for wisdom. And with each choice he made under her quiet encouragement, something else slipped beyond his reach. At home, TT watched the subtle changes without comment. She noticed the tension in Chitty's shoulders, the way his laughter had lost its ease, the nights he returned restless even when he said nothing was wrong. She did not ask questions because the answers no longer mattered. What mattered was the pattern forming clearly before her eyes. Effort without progress, confidence without stability. The house remained quiet, but the silence had shifted. It was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was filled with understanding. Musa felt the weight of the lie more heavily as time passed. What had begun as a single sentence spoken in obedience had grown into something larger, something that followed him into the quiet moments of his day. Each time he saw TT, respectful and composed, guilt tightened in his chest. She never questioned him again, never hinted at suspicion, and that, more than accusation, unsettled him deeply. He had expected anger, interrogation, even punishment. What he had not expected was her calm. It made his role in the deception feel sharper, more personal. As Chitty's life began to shift, Musa sensed the tension growing around him. Instructions came faster now, sometimes contradictory, sometimes edged with frustration. Chitty was less patient, quicker to blame, more restless than before. Musa noticed the way his employer leaned increasingly on Nena's influence, how decisions were made hastily, without the careful consideration Chitty once prided himself on. Musa wanted to speak, to warn him, but fear kept him silent. He had already crossed a line, and he did not know how to step back without falling. At night, Musa replayed the moment in the car when the lie had been planned, the urgency, the pressure, the woman's quiet presence in the back seat. He began to understand that obedience had not protected him. It had entangled him. Loyalty, he realized too late, could become complicity. And though he still performed his duties, something inside him had shifted. The lie no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a weight dragging everyone involved toward a place none of them could see clearly yet, but all of them would eventually reach. The realization did not arrive as a single moment of clarity. It crept into Chitty's mind in fragments, assembling itself slowly from repeated disappointments. He began to notice how his setbacks shared a rhythm, how each problem seemed to follow conversations he had with Nena, how decisions she encouraged carried consequences that landed heavier than expected. It unsettled him, not enough to accuse her, but enough to disturb the certainty he once carried. He started replaying past choices in his mind, searching for where things had gone wrong, and each path led back to moments when he had trusted her calm assurances over his own caution. What frightened him most was not the losses themselves, but how confidently he had walked into them, believing he was still in control. He tested the pattern quietly. He delayed acting on her suggestions once, choosing restraint instead of boldness. The result was immediate relief, small but noticeable. A door that had seemed closed cracked open again. A tension eased. It was subtle, but enough to make his chest tighten with dread. Chitty felt something cold slide through him as he realized that his peace no longer aligned with her presence, but with distance from it. For the first time, he wondered whether comfort had been the disguise, not the gift. Yet even then, he hesitated. Admitting he had been manipulated meant admitting he had endangered everything. His work, his marriage, his dignity, by choice. At home, TT watched him move through this unease without stepping in. She noticed the distracted way he sat, the way his eyes lingered on nothing, the nights he spoke less and paced more. She could feel the shift in the air, the quiet collapse of confidence that had once filled him. Still, she said nothing. Whatever he was discovering had to reach him without her guidance. She had already learned that truth forced rarely healed anything, and so she remained silent, letting the patterns speak for themselves. The truth finally surfaced on an ordinary evening, stripped of drama, but heavy with consequence. Chitty overheard a conversation not meant for him. Words spoken carelessly, names mentioned too freely, connections revealed in passing. In that instant, the pieces locked together with brutal precision. Nena had not found him by chance. She had been introduced, placed, guided. The gathering where they met, the timing of her appearances, her perfect understanding of his vulnerabilities, it had all been arranged. The realization struck him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless, his pride collapsing inward under the weight of it. He had not been seduced. He had been selected. Memories reassembled themselves cruelly. He recalled the host who had smiled too easily, the history he had dismissed as irrelevant, the past decision he had walked away from without looking back. He finally saw the enemy, not as a man standing before him, but as intention stretched over time, patient and unforgiving. Nena had been the instrument, not the author. Her calm now made sense. Her restraint, her refusal to demand anything. She had never needed to rush him. He had done all the damage himself. Chitty felt sick with understanding, realizing how thoroughly he had been undone without a single threat or confrontation. Panic followed quickly. He tried to pull away, to correct course, to salvage what remained. But the damage was already in motion, unfolding beyond his reach. Relationships he had neglected did not return. Opportunities he had gambled away did not pause for regret. And worse than all of it was the knowledge that he had lied to the one person who might have warned him if he had not hidden from her first. For the first time since that afternoon, Chitty felt truly afraid, not of loss, but of facing it alone. When Chitty finally turned back toward home, it was not with confidence or excuses, but with desperation. He arrived earlier than he had in weeks, his steps hurried, his voice uneven as he called TT's name. She was there, as she often was, composed and distant, her presence steady in a way that now made him feel exposed. He began to speak without structure, confessing in fragments about Nena, about the influence, about the realization that he had been used. He admitted the lie about the cousin, his voice cracking as he acknowledged the cowardice of hiding and running. The words spilled out urgently, as though speed might undo time. Titi listened without interruption. Her face remained calm, unreadable, not because she lacked feeling, but because she had already processed the pain he was only now understanding. Chitty reached for her reassurance, for anger even, for anything that would prove he still mattered enough to hurt. Instead, he found stillness. When he asked for help, his voice small and stripped of authority, the room seemed to absorb the plea without echo. He realized then that he was not arriving at the beginning of a conversation. He was arriving at its aftermath. Titi did not respond immediately. She stood, walked past him, and paused only long enough to say that she needed time he had already spent carelessly. Her refusal was not loud or cruel. It was measured, final in its calm. As she left the room, Chitty understood something with aching clarity. The woman he had hidden from was no longer available to rescue him. And the cost of realizing too late was not just loss, it was silence, earned and unwavering. Titi's refusal did not take the form of anger or accusation. It settled instead into a deliberate distance that no apology could easily cross. After Chitty's rushed confessions and fractured explanations, she moved through the house with quiet resolve, attending to her own needs without acknowledging his panic. She did not ask questions. She did not demand clarity. To her, the time for explanations had passed the moment he chose to hide rather than speak. Every word he now offered arrived too late, stripped the urgency it once might have carried. She understood his fear, but understanding did not require participation. And so she chose silence, not as punishment, but as protection. Chitty followed her through the house like a man chasing echoes, trying to reinsert himself into a space that no longer opened to him. He attempted gentleness, humility, even self-blame, but each approach dissolved against the steadiness of her withdrawal. Titi did not raise her voice. She did not mock him. She simply declined to engage, her attention fixed elsewhere, her boundaries firm. It unsettled him more deeply than anger ever could. He realized that forgiveness, when it came at all, required presence and honesty at the right moment, not desperation at the end of a collapse. That night, as Chitty lay awake in a room that felt foreign despite its familiarity, the weight of his choices pressed heavily on him. He understood now that Titi's silence was not cruelty. It was clarity. She had seen enough. And by choosing not to listen, she was reclaiming something he had taken for granted, the right to decide when, or if, she would re-enter the story he had broken. Time moved forward without waiting for Chitty's readiness. The consequences he had set in motion continued to unfold quietly, without spectacle or sympathy. What he lost did not announce itself loudly. It simply stopped responding. Doors closed without explanation. Trust evaporated without confrontation. The life he had assumed was stable revealed itself to have been held together by careful balance. One he had disrupted without noticing until the structure gave way. And in the center of it all stood Chitty, stripped of certainty, forced to confront the reality that he had been both victim and architect of his own undoing. Titi, on the other hand, grew steadier with each passing day. Distance gave her perspective, and perspective brought peace she had not expected. She no longer measured her worth by Chitty's remorse or recovery. She focused instead on herself, on dignity, on the quiet strength it took to step back from chaos without needing validation. Her silence became her boundary, her freedom. Whether forgiveness would ever come remained unanswered, but for now, it was not necessary. She had chosen clarity over comfort, and that choice anchored her. Chitty came to understand that too late was not just a phrase, it was a place, one he now occupied fully. He had mistaken opportunity for immunity, silence for safety, and escape for control. The woman he hid with had not been an escape at all. She had been the door through which consequences entered. And as the dust settled around him, with no audience and no applause, Chitty faced the final truth of his downfall. Karma does not need witnesses, and regret does not reverse time. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.